Pokemon obviously has one of the biggest modding scenes in gaming, with a massive community dedicated to both fixing the dozens of issues in the official titles, or even using them as a base to create something entirely new. And while my channel has almost entirely focused on the first 4 generations of ROM hacks, I thought it would be fun to take a step further, and what better way to do that than to list off the best Pokemon ROM hack for every generation. It'd be a fun way to show off just how far the ROM hacking scene has come, or how accessible it is for each iteration of the mainline games. However, if you do happen to finish this video and walk away without something new to play, then I highly suggest subscribing, as I cover the best and newest Pokemon fan projects released every month. But without further ado, my name is Ari, and let's get started. So, the first 3 gens are going to be a bit weird. Because of how advanced their respective ROM hacking scenes are, I feel it's a bit unfair to just list off one hack per generation. So, for generations 1, 2, and 3, I'll list off both an enhancement hack and a new region and story hack. Starting with Generation 1, which I believe should first go to Yellow Legacy, an enhancement hack that seeks to improve one of the earliest versions of the Kanto region. Now, unlike almost every other enhancement or difficulty hack I've played, Yellow Legacy applies a very interesting and almost magical touch to these games that I don't feel I've encountered much elsewhere, giving almost every Pokemon and move some sort of adjustment that doesn't remove the game's original identity, but are still enough to feel like I'm not actually playing through the base game again. They feel like changes Game Freak themselves would have made to the original product if they had the hindsight we have now. I think my only issue with the hack would be that it still holds that baby level difficulty Kanto has always had, but there is at least another version called Yellow Legacy Plus that significantly ups the challenge while still being far from unfair. But I also think the title of the best Generation 1 hack should also belong to Pokemon Brown, which just so happens to be the first ever new region and story hack to be delivered in a completed state. Even more impressively though, the hack has received significant updates over the past 20 years, providing you with modern mechanics like the physical special split, fairy type, Pokemon up to the 6th generation, and modern learn sets backported for all of them. I also wanted to point out just how nice the overworld looks. Sure, it's not breathtaking in 2025, but it is definitely the best I think it could possibly look for a first generation game. Pokemon Brown is easily the most impressive and most advanced version of the original games, and it's one of the few projects that's allowed me to enjoy them as someone who's always had a difficult time playing through the first generation. Now, I have to be honest, Gold and Silver always felt very far from the perfect Pokemon experience, with terrible level curves, atrocious Pokemon varieties, and boss teams that just didn't make much sense. And although Crystal fixed a good number of those issues, I think there was still a lot of work to be done. With that many problems, it was admittedly a bit difficult to find a hack that fixed all of them. So after a ton of research, and perhaps a bit of personal bias, I decided to go with Polished Crystal. As the title of the hack suggests, the main goal of this project was to apply as much polish as possible to the 2nd generation games, and in doing so, we're now left with much more detailed overworlds and UIs, alongside just so much more color. But of course, that polish also seeps into the gameplay side, with a greatly increased Pokemon variety, modified evolution requirements, and learn sets backported from Generation 6, alongside dozens of new moves. You'll also have the fairy type, the physical special split, and even abilities. With a full list of dozens of more features, I definitely think Polished Crystal is the best way to experience the 2nd generation games. But as impressive as it is, I think it pales in comparison to arguably one of the most technically advanced ROM hacks ever created. And that's obviously Pokemon Prism. With 20 badges across 6 regions, an incredible Pokemon variety from the first 4 generations, and dozens of unique mechanics, Prism is easily the biggest 2nd generation ROM hack ever made. And since it shares the same developers as Pokemon Brown, it's also received dozens of updates updates since its original 2016 release, making sure the hack can live up to the standards of the dozens that came after it. The only objective flaw I could possibly think of is that after the first 8 gyms, the hack starts to just feel like a boss rush of harder trainer battles. But overall, I think both of these hacks are the highest point of the second generation, offering a somewhat familiar gameplay experience that's been greatly enhanced with modern mechanics and design philosophies. We move on to Generation 3, which is easily the most technically advanced side of the Pokemon ROM hacking scene. So with that said, I might have to expand that 2 hacks per generation into 4. And while that may seem unfair, you might understand where I'm coming from at the end of the segment, starting on the enhancement side with Elite Redux. Arguably one of the most technically advanced ROM hacks ever created, Elite Redux provides a Pokemon experience like no other, allowing every Pokemon to have up to 4 active abilities, custom forms and Mega Evolutions, and easy ways to customize just about all of your Pokemon. But there is one thing I think holds the hack back from being, well, the best, and that would be its difficulty level. Even on the easiest mode, Elite Redux still requires a hefty level of planning and thinking for many of the hack's battles, including random route trainers. However, I do think that this will eventually become more of a non-issue once the hack receives updates that plan to include new maps, story changes, and even the inclusion of other regions. But for now, I think the title of the best Generation 3 enhancement hack should go to Open World Emerald. Out of the hundreds of ROM hacks I've played, this one is easily the most customizable, allowing you to pick where in Hoenn you want to start your journey, how you want your opponents to be scaled against you, what type of music you want to hear in-game, what generation of Pokemon you want to play with and against, and even how fast you want the battles to operate, without touching any of the emulator settings. You'll even be able to go farther than just Hoenn, with the Sevi Islands offering 8 extra gym badges, and even the Kanto region coming in a future update. Alongside dozens of other quality of life features, I just can't think of another enhancement hack that can offer more than Open World Emerald. Moving on though, are 2 hacks that, while offering 2 different experiences, are both equally as good as each other, and those would be Pokemon Odyssey and Pokemon Unbound. Starting with Unbound, it offers a much more traditional Pokemon experience, traveling through a new region, collecting 8 gym badges, and stopping an evil team. The highlight of the hack though would easily be its gameplay, with multiple different game modes, a huge variety of Pokemon, and nearly endless amounts of quality of life. The biggest and really only flaw I feel Unbound has, though, is the story. It feels very unoriginal and much like one most of us have played through dozens of times already. Many players can argue that the story doesn't matter compared to everything else, but when trying to call a ROM hack the best ever made, I do feel it's only fair to judge every aspect of it. But where Unbound fails with its storytelling, I feel Pokemon Odyssey makes up for it, with a much more unique plot, interesting characters, and in my opinion, a much more cohesive art style. On top of all that though, Odyssey also offers a huge world to explore through both the main story and tons of side content, dozens of quality of life features, and over 100 new regional forms, alongside balance changes to the 300 other canon ones. But with all that, I still think Unbound offers a bit more of a customizable gameplay experience that, alongside its more traditional feel, might appeal to many players a bit more than Odyssey can. At the end of the day though, I think both of these hacks are equally on par, offering much different experiences while covering each other's weaknesses. So as unfair or maybe weird as it might seem to list off that many, I think these are the 4 best Pokemon ROM hacks from the 3rd generation. So even with how far the DS ROM hacking scene has come, there still has yet to be an original region or story hack delivered in a completed state. So I will be going back to 1 hack per generation, and the one I've chosen for Generation 4 is Renegade Platinum. At its core, Renegade Platinum is an enhancement hack of the Sinnoh region's best game. And yes, I do purposefully use the term enhancement over difficulty hack, which I'll explain in a bit. But first, if If you somehow aren't already aware, Renegade Platinum includes the ability to acquire every Pokemon in the game without trading, buffs to all those Pokemon, modern mechanics like the Fairy type and Infinite TMs, and of course, every boss trainer now having an expanded roster. But unlike almost every difficulty hack I've played, Renegade Platinum's challenging fights are very fun and very fair, giving you tons of different tools to deal with enemies, to the point where you can almost always just feel on par with them. At no point during the game did I feel I needed to take a break and rebuild my entire team for a single fight. I could use the same rotating team of around 8 to 9 Pokemon to clear just about every boss in the game, while still feeling engaged during those battles. Beyond that though, Renegade Platinum offers 2 extra features that also separate itself from every other Platinum ROM hack. The first would be the increased gameplay speed, allowing you to run the game at 60 FPS without losing any audio quality. Arguably even better though is an unofficial patch that adds following Pokemon to the game, as well as a few enhanced soundtracks for various trainer battles. Renegade Platinum is just such a well-made ROM hack, to the point where even 6 years later, it has still yet to be topped in the NDS ROM hacking scene. It's a hack that I can suggest to just about anyone, and for that and every reason above, it absolutely deserves the title of the best Generation 4 ROM hack. With the assistance of the same creator though, came 2 new hacks that I have to say seriously blew my mind of what could be done with the 5th generation games. And those would be Blaze Black and Volt White 2 Redux. Like just about every other enhancement or difficulty hack, you can expect every Pokemon in the game available, buffs to Pokemon stat and learn sets, increased difficulty, and a handful of quality of life changes. But unlike many other difficulty and enhancement hacks, I feel all of those changes have been given much more attention to detail, as every Pokemon constantly had a selection of useful moves based on where I was in the game. Something I think went unnoticed by many people is that once again, unlike most other difficulty hacks, Redux offers an easy mode that doesn't just lie to you and offer an experience still noticeably harder than the mainline games. Rather, a very laid-back experience that allows casual players to enjoy all of the new changes to the Unova region, without being walled off by various boss battles. On to the actual new features though, you'll first have the Fairy type as well as dozens of new moves backported from future generations, but more importantly are a handful of new story events, giving a spotlight to the original game's forgotten characters and just bringing more life to the world, something that, sorry, once again, separates itself from many other difficulty hacks. I'm going to be honest, outside of overworld changes that obviously aren't possible yet, I think Redux is the perfect example of how to create a good enhancement hack, offering a fair and balanced experience for multiple playstyles, balance changes that feel engaging but not overwhelming, and a few story changes to make the experience feel fresh. So to me, it definitely deserves the title of the best Generation 5 ROM hack. Despite Kalos being my favorite region, I always felt the Generation 6 games were very underwhelming, offering almost zero challenge throughout the main story. So, for this generation, I've chosen 2 hacks very similar to the 2 before, and those would be Eternal X and Wilting Y. Once again, these hacks offer what you'd expect, a complete Pokemon variety, buffs to many of them, and harder boss battles. But unlike many of the hacks mentioned earlier, these ones take a much more vanilla approach to that rebalancing, making changes only where they feel needed, so that most Pokemon can feel useful, while also staying true to their original identities. What stood out to me the most though is the hack's adjusted level curve. The original games already took you to the late 60s in their main story, but even with that, you would constantly feel overleveled thanks to the EXP All. That's no longer a problem though, as the game has been rebalanced much more in favor of the EXP All remaining on at all times, without the player ever feeling much stronger than their opponents. To be honest, I don't have much else to say about these hacks, as the 3DS ROM hacking scene is still very much in its baby stages, but they are still significantly improved ways to enjoy X and Y, and for that reason, they'll obviously be taking the title of the best Generation 6 ROM hacks. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, in my opinion, are the best official titles when it comes to the gameplay. The Pokemon variety is diverse, the boss battles are quite challenging, and the quality of life is simple yet very appreciated. So what could possibly be done to improve these games? Well, with what's currently possible, not much. But I still think Photonic Sun and Prismatic Moon do the best they can. Once again, you'll have a wider Pokemon variety and rebalances to all of them, although many of those changes are focused on fixing one of the biggest issues with the new Pokemon, and that's just making them not abysmally slow. You'll also, of course, have an increase to the base game's difficulty, introducing new auras to the Totem Pokemon, and even many unimportant trainers receiving new teams. Like the last hack though, there still isn't much that can be done to improve much elsewhere. One thing I can hope for the future is a hack that adds a sort of skip button to the game's cutscenes, because as much as I enjoyed Gen 7's story on a first in a while playthrough, I feel its replayability level is significantly held back by its dozens of cutscenes, especially in the early game. But still, Photonic Sun and Prismatic Moon are definitely the best ways to replay the 7th generation if you're a veteran player looking for a bigger challenge. Sword and Shield. As a bystander, this was a fun generation, as it seems like just about everyone I knew detested these games. Whether it was for the National Dex cut, lack of any challenge whatsoever, a lackluster and uneventful story, or even a certain tree in the wild area. And until the DLCs were released, it really seemed to be the worst regarded Pokemon game among hardcore or longtime fans. But fortunately, thanks to the heavy amounts of talent and generosity in the ROM hacking scene, many of those issues were fixed in a mod called Divine Sword and Blessed Shield. As always, you can expect harder boss battles, a wider variety of Pokemon in the earlier parts of the game, and many buffs and changes to them. More specifically to the base games though, is a reworked raid system, giving you much better rewards, and shop changes that make competitive items and EXP candies available much earlier. However, once again, that's really about all that's possible, and all that will be possible for many years. But, of course, I still think that what was changed is incredibly significant, and will definitely give you a much better playthrough experience of the 8th generation games. And finally, we've arrived at Scarlet and Violet. Games that have been endlessly bashed for their visuals and performance issues, and nearly equally defended as good titles when ignoring those. However, I feel that focus on the game's visuals have left a much bigger gameplay-sided issue to be ignored. Without level scaling, the inability to disable the EXP all, and just how condensed early boss levels are, I always felt that unless you took the desired progression path, ignoring everything else around you, that you would easily become over-leveled and easily be able to mindlessly stomp every boss in your path, at least for the first half of the adventure. But this problem, alongside many others, were fixed in a mod called Pokemon Compass, which titles itself as a complete overhaul to Scarlet and Violet. Now, it should be noted that this game's intention isn't to drastically up the difficulty, rather create a much more balanced experience that allows a lot more breathing room in between story beats. This is of course done through increasing the levels, battle AI, and team rosters of boss trainers, and hundreds of other unimportant NPCs, although due to many technical reasons, it doesn't include any sort of level scaling for them. But I do think what has been done does a good enough job anyways. Unlike many other enhancement hacks though, Compass does not make any significant changes to the Pokemon themselves. So outside of some efforts to remove trait evolutions and version exclusives, you can expect every Pokemon to be at their official power levels. Compass also reworks every raid in the game, allowing them to scale to the player more appropriately and creating a more engaging experience during your main adventure. And most impressively, all of these changes will even carry over to the DLC, making Scarlet and Violet's massive story feel so much more enjoyable from a gameplay perspective. I think the mod is really incredible, and unlike almost every ROM hack I've played, showcases changes that I think Game Freak themselves would have moved towards if they had more time to develop the games. So if you want the best open world Pokemon experience imaginable, Compass will certainly deliver. Although there is one more mod I feel does need to be mentioned, and that would be Luminescent Platinum, a ROM hack of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. The original goal of this hack was to recreate Renegade Platinum within the 3D remakes, and thanks to the base games using both the Unity engine and extremely similar source code to the originals, it was quickly discovered how much more could be included. So first, you can obviously expect all the changes introduced in Renegade Platinum, as well as the quality of life in BDSP, like the EXP All. But alongside that comes optional level caps, an in-party mover learner, and many other miscellaneous features. Most impressively though, would be a plethora of graphical changes, mainly with the objective of making the game look more like Platinum, but also adjusting the proportions of many Pokemon in and outside of battle. Unlike Renegade Platinum though, you'll also be able to obtain a lot of Pokemon introduced after the 4th generation. Now, as impressive as this mod is, and as easy as it might seem to create compared to the other 3D Pokemon games, I do want to warn people that it will still be a very long time before the BDSP ROM hacking scene is further expanded upon. This is mostly due to just how much more inaccessible Switch modding is to the average player, compared to both the GBA and NDS, but also the much higher barrier of entry required to work with 3D models compared to tile sets and sprites, not to mention the lack of available resources or tutorials, once again compared to the GBA hacking scene. So I wouldn't get your hopes up for a 3D focused Pokemon modding scene for at least another decade. So, although it might seem a bit disappointing that ROM hacks past the 3rd generation haven't advanced as far as many of you would have expected, I think it's better to be proud of what has been done, and what is possible thanks to the hard work of the thousands of passionate modders in the Pokemon community. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe even found something new to play while watching. But anyways, thank you to my channel members for their continued support, and have a nice rest of your day.